Hi everyone and welcome back to Stephan podcast brought to you by Bold. Rejoining me on the show today is Matt Corallo. Matt is working at Spiral. Nowadays, I guess mostly on Lightning and Lightning development stuff, but previously was, quite actively involved in Bitcoin Core, and still obviously commenting on broader Bitcoin issues as well. So welcome back to the show, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Matt, I know you were keen to talk about saveourwallet.org, or the Save Our Wallets campaign, let's say. So give us a bit of the background on this. What is this campaign?
Yeah, so it starts with hats, obviously. But so
As many
I think
Bitcoin campaigns do. Go on.
right. As all good Bitcoin campaigns do. So it starts really with the Samurai case. So I think most of your viewers probably are familiar with Samurai wallet. It was this CoinJoin wallet that got charged in the United States with a few charges, but most importantly, including operating an unlicensed money services business. So the US government alleged that, under Biden, under the previous administration, alleged that Samurai Wallet, despite being non-custodial, despite the only thing they operated was a server that just kind of helped people find CoinJoin peers, they had to, according to the US government, they needed to register as a money services business, just like any other financial institution. They needed to do AML KYC. They needed to do, yearly audits of their AML and KYC programs to make sure that they're up to some bar that they couldn't meet. They're a non-custodial wallet. Like, they can't do any of these things. This makes no sense. But the argument that the US government made was super broad. They said that anyone doing anything related to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency was a money services business, basically. Um, and this was frightening, right? So this caused Phoenix to leave the United States. This caused a lot of developers to second guess what they were building, because fundamentally the argument that they were advancing applied to every second layer. So everything from Lightning to Arc to rollups. It was caught up in this argument that basically if you're running some ancillary service, you have some server involved that is powering a non-custodial wallet that's just like doing anything, enabling a non-custodial wallet, you now have to do some kind of AML KYC program that you cannot possibly do because it's non-custodial. You can't control what people do with their money. It's non-custodial. That's the whole point of non-custodial. So this was obviously very frightening. This drove Phoenix out of the US. This really opened the question of, like, can we do decent non-custodial wallets in the United States? Obviously, I think to have a good user experience on a non-custodial wallet, you need to use some kind of L2, some kind of, second layer above Bitcoin. And so fast forward a little bit, the Trump administration has walked back some of the charges, not all of the charges. They're still charging Samurai with one count of operating an unlicensed money services business, not three anymore, which is better, but they're still charging them with the same thing. And so, but even if they weren't, what happens in the next administration? When we get President AOC next, or whatever, someone who's maybe super anti-Bitcoin, they're going to want to come after us. And here's this thing on the shelf, this idea of how to come after everything that makes Bitcoin usable in a non-custodial form, where you can shut down all the good non-custodial wallets, you can drive people to custodial wallets, and then you can do whatever you want to those entities. And so I think there's real risk in 3 years or in 3.5 years of what things look like under the next administration if we don't get the law fixed, so that this is just simply not an option.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to make here that a lot of developers were proceeding under this. Now, I'm not an American, I'm an Australian, but nevertheless, we kind of have to follow what's going on in the US. And my understanding is that a lot of developers were proceeding under this 2019 FinCEN guidance, and that was sort of the guiding line of saying, hey, if you're non-custodial, some of these regulations don't apply to you, and therefore you have a certain level of legal protection or some level of you're not going to get in trouble for making this software.
Yeah.
And I think that is what most people were proceeding under, right?
Yeah, so that's a great point. The 2019 guidance from FinCEN was pretty good. So I mentioned, one of the aspects of running a licensed MSB is you have to register, and the entity you need to register with is FinCEN. So they're responsible for really interpreting this law. And they said, look, if you're not custodial and You're like a decentralized thing. We don't need you to register. This doesn't make sense for you to this law just doesn't make sense to try to apply to you. So instead, we want, regulate, custodial entities to be regulated, but if you're not, you can't register. But here comes the DOJ and says, no, 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 we're going to come after you with criminal charges. We're going to put you in prison for not registering with an entity that said you don't need to register, which just makes the charges all the more absurd. But irrespective of that, again, the next administration can replace who's at FinCEN. They can change that guidance. That guidance is just guidance. It's just FinCEN's read of the rules. It's not formal. You can't, it's not, it's a defense you can raise in court, but it's not like a get out of jail free card. You can't say like, look, FinCEN said I don't have to register, thus I don't have to. It was just their read of the rules. It wasn't even their rules. It was just their read of the rules. Um, so that can change too. That can change pretty easily too under the next administration. And yeah, I mean, people were proceeding under that guidance because it's what we had, and it was a reasonable guidance. It made sense, and so people were saying, okay, fine,
Yeah.
whatever. But if the administration wants to come after people, they can do that. And yeah, to your point, the U.S. government has a lot of levers they can pull in going after people all over the world if you're servicing American customers.
Right. And I guess, famously in the case of BitMEX and famously in the case of Binance, like this has been one of the ways that they have gone after people. And, Arthur Hayes and a few other BitMEX founders, they got in trouble because of this. CZ got in trouble because of similar things. Now, you were touching on this. I think there's this bombshell kind of, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that the DOJ, as I understand, went and actually asked FinCEN about this before even filing charges against the Samurai Wallet guys, and said they did not even believe they were, they had to go and register as an MSB, but nevertheless, now they were getting prosecuted as though they needed to be an MSB and all of this. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the DOJ wanted to come after Samurai. The DOJ has had a longstanding principle of coming after any kind of privacy services in the cryptocurrency world. That's been high on their priority list. They want to stop privacy services so that people don't have privacy, so that they can trace all of the Bitcoin transactions and enforce whatever laws they want to, which is good in some sense, but also everyone has a right to privacy, and shutting down non-custodial services on what I would say are very, very, very tenuous legal claims is obviously not acceptable. So yeah, they asked FinCEN. FinCEN said no, and the DOJ said, "Look, we want this to happen. We want to come after these guys because we think what they're doing is bad. They're preventing us from doing our work elsewhere. Privacy is bad. Screw you." And so they came up with whatever charges they had. And I think the real worry is that they apply that to Lightning. They apply that to rollups. Look, a lot of rollups are looking at privacy enhancing technologies with Jonas Nick and his
Shielded
co-authors.
CSV, yeah.
Shielded CSV, thank you. With Shielded CSV, Lightning obviously has privacy. The reality is, if we add scaling, you generally, by default, get additional privacy, because the whole way we scale is by putting less information on the chain. And if we put less information on the chain, there's less information on the chain for you to go after to break people's privacy. It's just, they come hand in hand, whether we want it or not. And so there's real risk that the next administration either says, look, Lightning, Shielded CSV, whatever, these are privacy technologies and not just scalability technologies. And so we're going to go after them based on that. But there's also a risk that they just say, look, we don't like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. It's Trump associated now. It's now a right-wing thing in the United States. And the next, the pendulum always swings. The next administration will be not as right-wing as Donald Trump. Will they be far left or somewhere in the middle? I don't know. But there's a real chance that there's some Elizabeth Warren Democrat, and their view is we need to put people at DOJ who are going to shut down cryptocurrency via any avenues possible. And I don't want to end up
and we've
in that
seen that
position.
they tried that in terms of the mining level. They were trying to sort of dox the sites and the energy deals that they had. There are all kinds of things. And similarly, not even layer twos, even just things like PayJoin, right? PayJoin V2 has like, as I understand, they're using like servers to coordinate the page join. Now,
Right.
again, it's a scalability win, but it is also a privacy win. So the same kind of
Yeah.
argument could be leveraged against our industry, let's say the Bitcoin industry. So let's get to the what you guys are trying to push for. What are you trying to do on wallet freedom?
Yeah, so we really need to get the law changed. If the law is changed, then there's not much they can do. Getting the law changed again, going back to Congress and changing it again is a very high bar. Um, and so if we get the law changed now to say explicitly, look, if you're not custodial, you're not an MSB. This just does not apply. This regulation is not, doesn't make sense to apply to you. There's plenty of other regulations. You still have to enforce sanctions. You still can't here with someone in Russia or North Korea or Iran. But being an MSP just doesn't make sense. So, yeah, our goal is to get the law changed. A few weeks ago, the two Congress people, Tom Emmer, who's the House Majority Whip for the non-Americans, that is the number two position on the Republican side of the House, as well as uh, Congressman Richie Torres, who's from New York, a Democrat in the Bronx. So this bipartisan bill introduced the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which was super simple, two-pager. If you're not a custodian, if you're not custodial, you don't control the funds, you are not an MSB, you are not regulated as such, plain and simple. Now, that was a great bill. We were big fans of it. We were pushing it. The reality is getting a vote, getting floor time on the Senate, getting a vote to just have a very small bill like that passed on its own is really hard. The Senate's busy, the House is busy. You don't generally get time to do those kinds of small bills on their own. So it's now been included in what's called the market structure bill. So this was the bill that the Trump administration has asked Congress for. That was all about uh, securities laws, token issuance, a bunch of crap we don't care about as Bitcoiners. The law didn't really affect Bitcoin. We didn't care about it, whatever, but it's a priority for the administration. It's a priority for this Congress. And so it has a decent chance of passing. There's always politics. You never know what's going to happen, but it has a decent chance. And we've now gotten the language from the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act slightly modified, not quite as good, but still very good protection for non-custodial wallets included in the Market Structure Act. So it's now Section 110 of the Clarity Act on the House side. And our goal is to A, make sure that Section 110 stays there, because as things go through Congress, bills get amended, things change before they pass. And then number two, make sure it passes. Again, all the security stuff, it's pretty good public policy. I mean, it's not anything Bitcoiners care about. It's not really super helping tokens. They were already going to do whatever, but it's still it's fair regulation, I would say, of token issuance. And so we want that to pass, but most importantly, we need it to pass to make sure that non-custodial wallets stay good in Bitcoin, that we have access to good non-custodial wallets as Bitcoiners in the next administration.
Yeah, I see. And so, what's the ask? What are you hoping people do?
Yeah, I mean, we need to put the pressure on. Right now, it has passed committee on the House side. It's now going to go up for a vote on the whole House floor on the House side. Now, we only need 50% or 50% plus one House members to vote to pass it. But if we don't see a showing of Democrats there, the Senate might not take it up. They might not care. The Senate, of course, you need 60% in the Senate to pass a filibuster in the United States. So you can't just pass it on party lines. You can't just have Republicans pass it in the Senate side. We need Democrats on the Senate side. And if we don't have a showing of Democrats on the House side, they might just not think it's worth trying to take the vote. So we really need people to stand up and call their congressperson. I know it's annoying. It takes 5 minutes. It's super easy. You just pick up the phone. You say, look, hi, I'm a constituent. When I go to vote for you or not vote for you in November of next year or the 2 years after that or 2 years after that, I will be considering what you do right now. If you vote against this, or if you try to remove Section 110 or You do any other games here, I'm not going to vote for you. And they do care. Ultimately, picking up the phone and calling is proof of work for them. They don't have great information generally about what their constituents actually care about. They do regular public polling, but yeah, there's only so much you can get out of public polling, especially on kind of niche issues like this that most people aren't aware of, most people aren't paying attention to. And so when you pick up the phone and you call and you speak to someone there, or you leave a voicemail sometimes, but often you can speak to one of their staff members, they make a note of it and they keep track of it. And if they get 5 or 10 calls in a week, they're going to think about it a little bit. If they get, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50 calls in a week, suddenly it's going to shift their vote very materially. So we need people to pick up the phone. We built a nice little website, saveourwallets.org. You can go there, you can type in your zip code. It'll give you the phone numbers to call. You've got 2 senators and a House member. Right now, maybe just call your House member. In a few weeks, call your senators. Pick up the phone. It's super easy. It takes 5 minutes. You're going to sit here and listen to an hour-long podcast. You've got the 5 minutes. Just do it. It'll make a huge difference because if we don't get this, I think there's a really good chance that either in the next administration or the administration after, non-custodial wallets start really getting hammered in the US. And that's going to keep developers from building them. It's going to keep everyone from offering those services. No LSPs are going to serve the US. Lightning nodes in the US are going to be a questionable endeavor. And people just aren't willing to risk going to prison. It's not worth it for me as a developer. Maybe I'll write the code, but you won't be able to use it because there won't be any LSPs. I'm not going to run an LSP. Phoenix isn't going to take the risk. They already showed they weren't going to take the risk. Nobody's going to sit down and say, I'm willing to risk going to prison so that you can have a non-custodial wallet. It's not going to happen.
This episode is brought to you by CoinKite, the makers of my favorite Bitcoin hardware wallet, the Cold Card Q. Now, some people think self-custody is too hard, but it's really about taking responsibility for your Bitcoin wealth and understanding that self-custody gives you a true feeling of liberty. The Cold Card Q has a full keyboard and big screen. It's got 2 secure elements and a true air gap, allowing you to go fully air-gapped using QR codes from seed generation to transaction signing. You can power the device using 3 AAA batteries, so you don't even have to plug it into the wall for power. You can easily use it with Sparrow Wallet for PC or Nunchuck on mobile, and you can dial it into the right level of security and complexity that you choose. If you want a simple setup, just use 12 words and single signature. If you want passphrases, easy. If you want to add multi-sig or co-signing features, you've got those too. So go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get 10% off on your cold card or other devices and level up your self-custody today. This episode is brought to you by Galoy, builders of banking software for the Bitcoin age. After years of risk and uncertainty, Bitcoin and banking are colliding. The regulatory environment is rapidly shifting in favor of Bitcoin and digital assets. Fintechs and crypto-native companies can become chartered banks, and traditional banks and credit unions will launch Bitcoin products. But the legacy core banking software that many financial institutions run on wasn't built for Bitcoin. The Galoy banking infrastructure stack delivers all the key elements of a modern core banking platform with cloud-native infrastructure, event-based architecture, and robust APIs coming together to meet the security, scalability, and reliability needs of banks of the future. Whether you are launching a modern financial institution from the ground up, or you are adding Bitcoin-backed lending or payments to your product offering, talk to the team at Galoy. Visit galoy.io or reach out to the team at biz@galoy.io. Gotcha. Yeah. So, I will remind listeners, of course, links will be in the show notes. So it's saveourwallets.org. Just a reminder for American listeners, check that out. Give it a go. Sometimes these things are frustrating, but there are times where you've got to advocate for our interests. This is our industry. We're Bitcoiners. We want, freedom for developers and builders in the US to continue building because there are already a lot of builders already there. There's a lot of developers and entrepreneurs and investors. And not just that, there are companies outside the US who serve inside the US. So I guess it's all of those things that are, kind of at stake here. Maybe not right now, but in the future. So it's something that we want to, get done as an industry. I can probably think it's kind of like a parallel with, I think it was like a broker DeFi rule for miners. That was like something a couple of years ago that kind of went in, and just recently, I think maybe a couple months ago, something got passed there to make it so that miners were not going to be captured inside this broker DeFi rule or whatever. So it's a similar kind of thing where we need to get this done to give our industry the best chance for survival.
Right.
So yeah, so I guess we'll leave that there. But I guess broader in the U.S. politics conversation, I'm curious. Do you have any reflections on other priorities, other things going on, whether that's SBR at the federal level or at the state level? Do you have any thought on those?
Yeah, I mean, I think by far the most important is the now Clarity Act or Section 110 of the Clarity Act. Because I Bitcoin is for people, right? Bitcoin is hopefully the best money. We certainly that's our goal at Spiral is to make Bitcoin the best money out there and to get people to be able to use the best money. And that means non-custodial wallets. Yeah, there's a lot of people who want to invest in Bitcoin. It's cool. Bitcoin should be a part of a well-balanced portfolio. Whether I don't happen to think it should be 100% of your well-balanced portfolio, but certainly it should exist in your well-balanced portfolio. States which have a strategic reserve should probably include Bitcoin as a part of that. States which don't, I mean, I guess they could start building one by buying Bitcoin, fine. But, is this like the most exciting thing? Is it just getting the government to pump our bags? Like, that's not really the point. The point is to build something that really allows you to transact without trusting any third parties, where you can hold your money, you don't have to trust anyone, you can pay somebody, no one else is involved in that payment. It's just between you and them, and it's just the best money, right? Like that's the goal. And so
Okay.
from that point of view, yeah, I mean, I think the only thing happening that matters is save our wallets and Section 110 of the Clarity Act.
Yeah.
You could
Any thoughts
also,
on cap gains exemption or de
yeah,
minimis
that's
cap gains, that kind
that's
of
what I
thing?
was going to mention. You could also say that that's helpful. Certainly, there are some people, I would imagine not very many, who are cautious about spending Bitcoin because they have to pay cap gains every time they spend it. Certainly, that's something we should get fixed. Do I think it's preventing lots of people from spending Bitcoin? I don't really think so. In practice, I think there's probably a lot of people who simply don't pay their tax when they spend $5 in Bitcoin. Is the IRS going to come after them? No. Is it, are they substantially defrauding the US government of the $2 in tax revenue when they buy a $5 something with Bitcoin? No. It's just not material, right? And so that's part of why it should have a diminutive exemption. Yes. It's not a material amount of money. I think it recently got scored by the CBO at a few billion or something. It was not a large sum. So I know Lummis is trying to push it. That's also important, certainly. But if there aren't good non-custodial wallets, then who cares? Like, why? We're not,
Gotcha.
you
Yeah.
can't transact with Bitcoin
Yeah.
without a
The
good
censorship
wallet. So,
resistant aspect of it is the important part for you there. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, totally fair. One other point that might be interesting, I'm curious to get your view. Some of this kind of touches even outside of Bitcoin world or even outside of quote unquote crypto world, but this FATF and AML stuff, right? So FATF, Financial Action Task Force, and then they're like this project out of the OECD, but they kind of, are funded by many nation states. And then they kind of come up with these guidelines, and then all these individual nation states implement those. And then as a result of that, there's regulations that local exchanges, banks, and, VASPs or whatever have to comply with. This does create risk for people. Like the recent example, Coinbase, there were a lot of customers who had their information doxed. Um, there was the recent French kidnapping cases. Maybe some of that data it leaks, and then there are people, their lives are at risk. So, do you think there's any chance of pushing back on FATF and AML and just this broad, AML overregulation that the
yeah,
world is facing?
it would be nice. I mean, I think the best way we push back on that is by making non-custodial wallets good and readily available for everyone by having, everyone just want to use a non-custodial wallet because the user experience is competitive with custodial wallets and it's the best way to use Bitcoin. I think that's the way we push back on it. Of course, that doesn't help onboarding and offboarding. People will still be caught up in the AML trap and the KYC trap. I wish I were confident that we could, you know, start to move that, push that back a little bit. I'm not. Uh, I'm happy that it's now part of the Overton window. Like there's been work being done to push that into the Overton window to say really like, look, the this stuff is not succeeding. It is not accomplishing its goal, and it is actively harmful to consumers. And it's more harmful to consumers on net than the amount of illicit funds that AML and KYC captures on net either, right? So I'm happy those kinds of conversations are happening, and maybe over the next decade, that's something we can start to whittle away at, and we can start to make progress on. But I'm not confident in it in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's going to be a long-term project, but there are examples, right, where it's very real for people, right? Whether it's the Canadian trucker protest, those guys getting their bank accounts shut down, whether it's Nigel Farage getting debanked in the UK, whether it's the Trump family getting debanked in the US. We're going to see more and more of these examples of how AML laws are being weaponized against the everyday people. And so
Yeah.
I think it would be nice to see kind of more pushback there. Maybe as NGU happens, Bitcoiners get richer and they start pushing back against these things. But I mean, for now, maybe
Yeah.
our chances aren't so great.
I mean, I think in all likelihood, regulation around debanking will probably just be more regulation for banks rather than less regulation for banks. Um, Sadly. So I think in practice, that's not really going to move the needle there as much as it should. I think the way we move the needle there is by making Bitcoin the best it can be so that it is an alternative. So that, if you don't want KYC, you don't want to deal with all this stuff, and you just want to transact between you and the person you're transacting with, you use Bitcoin and you use non-custodial Bitcoin, and the user experience is as good or better than your Venmo, your PayPal, your bank, whatever. And I think
Yeah.
we can get
Okay.
there,
So
and I think we
yeah,
will get there soon. In fact, um,
of course. And I think you and I, and probably most listeners, where most of us are in this kind of not your keys, not your coins camp. We want to encourage self custody, all that. But there are times where we kind of have to look at the reality of the world today. And right now, today, as I look at mempool.space right now, so today it's the 14th of June, and it's one sat per vbyte to get into the next block on mempool.space.
yeah.
So we can say not your keys, not your coins till the cows come home. But there's a lot of people who must be coming into this not doing that. Why is
But
that, in your view?
part of it too is bad user experience, right? Today, using Bitcoin non-custodially in general is a terrible user experience. There's no wallets are slow. I mean, just transacting on chain is a terrible user experience. I mean, it's cool that we have this magic internet money thing and you can transact on chain and there's no intermediary and yada yada yada. But the user experience is terrible. You hit send, your money disappears into the ether, you don't know where it is, and then at some point the other side, maybe in 10 minutes, maybe in an hour, maybe in 10 seconds, you don't really know, is gonna accept your money. It's an unusably bad user experience. Um, and so this is why you see people love custodial Lightning wallets. I think Miles on stage at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas said that something like 25% of Cash App's withdrawals by count are now Lightning. Lightning fixes that user experience, but non-custodial Lightning has historically not been a good user experience either. It has really suffered. I think that's going to change over the next year. Now, of course, the future will be here, but it will not be evenly distributed. um,
Right.
we're rapidly closing the gap on a lot of the engineering challenges that have made Lightning difficult to use. Random force closures, issues where the protocol just wasn't. It was 99% stable, but it wasn't 110% stable, and that bubbles up into the user experience, and suddenly you're like, "Why is my money locked for 6 months? I have no idea what's going on." That's unacceptable, right? So we're rapidly closing a lot of those gaps over the next 6 months to a year. I think we're going to have closed those gaps to the point where you can really build a credibly awesome user experience on top of non-custodial Lightning. Now, not all wallets will. There will be a lot of bad wallets out there, but there will be some that will be super competitive. And Phoenix is mostly there. The fees are a little high, sadly, because of the investment that is required to build something like Phoenix. It's not like they're rolling in the dough just because their fees are a little high. It's to cover costs. Um, but we're rapidly driving down that investment cost. Fees are going to get lower. And I think on top of that, the existence of credible custodial or at least fully trusted solutions will bridge the gap between a wallet that receives its first SAT and a wallet that has 10,000 or 100,000 SATs. A lot of people like to install wallets, link their Noster, get a 21 SAT zap, and then have a wallet with 21 sats that they can send back out. You can't do that with non-custodial, not just non-custodial Lightning. You can't do that with non-custodial, period. Doesn't matter what the
Right.
technology is. That is not non-custodial. Um, and so having good custodial or trusted technologies, you know, eCash, Cashew, Fedimint, Liquid, and Spark now are really compelling options for wallets to bridge that gap and then move users into non-custodial balances as they have more and more money in their wallet. So I think these types of wallets, there's several people building this kind of graduated wallet thing. There's been a number of attempts at it. Mutiny tried it years ago. Lightning wasn't ready for it. Fedimint wasn't ready for it. These technologies are finally getting to the point where they are ready for it. And so now it makes sense to start investing in those kinds of wallets. And I think we're going to see a lot of those over the next 6 months to a year. And they're going to look really good. They're going to be super slick user experience. They're going to be as good as custodial. And I think that's what moves the needle. You pointed out that people use custodians today. People don't want to use non-custodial wallets. And I think it's just because the UX sucks. And I think we're going to fix the UX. And there will be a lot of shitty non-custodial wallets next year and the year after that and the year after that. But there will also be good non-custodial wallets this year.
Interesting. Yeah. And so, as I'm reading from you there, it's that L2s have developed both Lightning and other things like Arc and other ideas, and Spark, what you were saying as well, which, as I understand, is it's like a state chain kind of idea coming out of the LightSpark, company, and there are, there seems to have been a lot of developer excitement around that also, and so I guess the general idea that you're getting to is this idea of the graduated wallet, that it can maybe start with like Cashew for that 21 sats level, and then it can graduate up to something like Liquid or Arc or Spark, and over time then graduate maybe to a Lightning full-blown channel or on-chain for larger amounts. So I guess the point you're trying to make there is that the graduated wallets are going to get better over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the graduated wallets are going to exist. I think, the right now Zeus does it, but it's not automated. So I don't think the user experience is really good yet. But no one else really does it. Mutiny tried, but it wasn't ready.
Yeah. What
Um,
is it? Blitz? Is it Blitz Wallet? Another one that I think they're trying something like this.
there are a lot of wallets who are starting to try stuff in this direction. I Not many of them have gotten very far yet. It's only started fairly recently, this trend, I think. Um, and I think it's going to look really good. And I don't think it needs to be as complicated as you were making it out. I think it's really just you start with something trusted, eCash, Liquid, Spark, and then you move to something not trusted, which means Lightning or Lightning on top of Arc once Arc ships. Really all you do. I don't think you go on chain. Like if users have enough money that they know they need a better security model, just being on chain on the phone isn't really a better security model. It needs to be some kind of
Right. Into like
multi-sig
hardware
setup.
wallet, multi-sig, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, air-gapped computer, something like that. Um, and users understand that. They have a conception of like, oh, this is, $10 million. Why is this on my phone? I should not have this on my phone. Like users understand that concept. So we don't have to hold their hand and do it for them or anything. Um, but yeah, so I think even just the simple like start trusted, move to non-custodial as you get higher balance will really do that. And I think it's gonna be really good once the kinks get ironed out and over the next, I think, 6 months as we start to ship it, as Lightning rounds the corner, etc.
Yeah. Gotcha. And I guess related in terms of UX, the whole BIP 353 human readable thing that you came out with, I noticed now that that is in Phoenix and it's also in Misty Breeze. So that's an example where it's just like it's an app, you can download it and install it, you don't have to run a server, and now you have this persistent. I have Lavera at breeze.fun as an example. Like people can just you can just pay to that, and you don't have to run a server for it.
Yeah.
So that is probably also going to help move the needle in terms of having a contact list style experience when you pay or receive.
Yeah, I think contact lists are going to be a thing too. I think our mission at Spiral is to enable more people to build wallets and to explore what different user experiences in Bitcoin look like. We just want to provide technologies so that it's super easy to build a wallet. I think our goal really is that in the next year, year and a half, you should be able to take all of our products and go to an LLM and say, hey, build me a wallet. And it will one shot a pretty good non-custodial Bitcoin wallet that's super stable, works 100%, maybe just has a bad user, maybe has a bad UI that you want to clean up, but is super stable and works 100%, and you can trust with your money. So that's our goal, and I think that really enables more competition and more exploration of what good Bitcoin
Yeah.
non-custodial user experience looks like. And from there, we'll learn a lot more as a community is what things look like. But to your point about 353,
Yeah.
yeah, I think contact lists are huge. The thing that really gets me excited about 353 is hardware wallets, the ability to have, today most people use hardware wallets and deposit to their exchange and they don't do any meaningful verification, right? They go to their exchange website on their computer, which has some malware on it. They hit deposit, it shows an address, the malware changes that address, and then they copy and paste it into their wallet. They hit send, and then they hold up their hardware wallet to their computer and they make sure that the address on the hardware wallet matches the address on their screen, which has been changed by malware. This has accomplished nothing, right? Many exchanges do allow you to pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, is this an address that's mine? I know some people do that, but I would guess that it's something like 0.1%, right? It's fairly rare that people would
Right. It needs
actually
to be
do something like
automated
this.
in the background, that kind
Right.
of thing.
And so 353 actually enables this, right? 353 lets the exchange use their existing domain name that you already are trusting as part of using the exchange, and use the DNS, so the thing that actually controls their domain name, and sign the addresses that they're allowing you to deposit. So you could say, hey, I'm depositing to my account at River or my account at Cash App, and my cash tag is, I don't actually know what my cash tag is. I think it's like Blue Mat or something. So my Blue Mat at cash.app or cash tag or whatever, and then I can go on my hardware wallet and it'll say, do you want to pay to Blue Mat at cash.app? And I can know, look,
Right.
cash.app is where I'm paying, and that's my username, and I can verify it myself. I can read it. It's human
Yeah.
readable. And so that's,
So then I guess what you need is the hardware wallet has to have the support for BIP 353. Do hardware
yeah.
wallets have that support yet, or you're hoping that
It's
they do implement that?
Yeah, it's more of it's been a chicken and egg problem, honestly. I think the user experience there is going to be killer, but you need you need the recipient to support it, so you need exchanges to support it. I think that'll come, but slowly. You need the software wallet to support it, so the software wallet has to do the resolution, and then it has to include the proof in the PSBT. And it's all standardized. It's pretty easy. There's code
Right.
for it. You just have to integrate the code. And then the hardware wallet needs to know how to read that proof out of the PSBT, verify it,
Gotcha.
and display it. And again, there's code for it. You just use it. But it's a triple chicken and egg. There's three entities that all have to support it before it becomes available. And so it has been admittedly pretty slow going. I'm hopeful we start to see one or two, and I think it's one of those. It's the user experience is 15 times better, and so once that gets deployed anywhere, I think people are going to be clamoring for it real quick.
Yeah, or maybe it'll take a really expensive address replacement attack before then people will be like, oh, wait a sec, we've just been like YOLOing funds based on the website
The
for
problem is there's
years.
been so many of those.
Right.
There is
Yeah.
actually a lot
Yeah.
of malware out there that will replace any Bitcoin address in your clipboard. And there's a decent chunk of malware that will replace any Bitcoin address displayed in a website. It's a thing. That malware exists. And quite a bit of it exists. So as far as am aware, the malware authors for that malware have made a decent chunk of money just based on looking at the
Damn,
chain. So
that sucks. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, I knew it was out there. I didn't know how prevalent it was, basically. So, yeah, that kind of sucks. But
yeah. I
yeah, let's
mean,
hope. Let's see.
not all computers have malware on them, right? But I think most computers that have malware probably have an address switcher. Certainly in the clipboard. Not all of them will switch the address displayed on a website, but some of them will.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's talk a little bit about MEVil. I know this is another topic you've been you've been talking about it. Even past shows we've spoken about it. But it seems as let me put it this way: it seems there's a little bit more advanced conversation on this idea now. That I guess as an example, with the whole cat op cat conversation, there was a lot of discussion about, oh, okay, is that going to create all this MEVil? Does do Bitcoin developers and protocol developers have to go do research to figure out exactly where are the forms of MEVil? But then I'm hearing other responses from people saying things like, well, hang on, Bitcoin has 10-minute block times and it has a UTXO model, not an account model. So therefore, it's less of a concern, but there's still some forms of MEVil. Where does this all kind of shake out for you? What's your current thinking on this?
Yeah, I think most of the arguments that Bitcoin cannot possibly have any MEVil concerns, that people won't or can't build things on Bitcoin that can have MEVil are a stretch. Um, but at the same time, we don't know what people will use. The problem with evaluating MEVil risks is that it really gets into kind of third order effects, right? So there's, okay, what capabilities does the blockchain have? And then there's what will people build with those capabilities? Not just what could they build, but what will they build? And then there's, okay, but if that does get built, what will people actually use? Will people have any interest in it? Will people use it? There are things in Bitcoin today that could cause really substantial MEVil risks. There's rootstock, there's other merged mine side chains that where the miners could, you could have this crazy big AMM on rootstock. Not to pick on them, there's a few examples where there's tons of trading volume and the miners get to pick what goes into those blocks in Bitcoin, and they could do all of the same MEV games that you have in Ethereum. And they certainly would if there were any money to be had there. But the reality is nobody uses rootstock. So the you end up with these like third order effects that ultimately make the difference. And so it's not it's a hard conversation to have, and it's also an even harder thing to reason about because you have no idea there's these third order effects. Who knows, right? Like nobody has any idea. Um, so, there have been some attempts, you highlighted a few of the arguments to say that we can't possibly have MEV in Bitcoin. One is that we have the UTXO model, which of course is nonsense because rollups break the UTXO model, right? If we have rollups, you paper over the UTXO model with potentially EVM and the account model. So it doesn't really matter what the underlying chain supports if you're doing a rollup or based rollup specifically. Um, there's also the argument that, well, the block time is 10 minutes. Some of the MEV complexity in Ethereum comes from the fact that blocks are rigid. So you have literal high frequency trading games where you have to be in the right data center so you can submit your block 10 milliseconds later than the last guy because the block is going to get mined at this time and you want to get your bid in as close to that time as possible, but not past the time. That's true. The same games don't apply in Bitcoin, but different games, because the block time is stochastic, you don't know when the block is going to come. Different games apply. So now instead you need the ability to time out transactions because you need a miner to constantly be updating what transaction they would mine. Based on the fluctuating Bitcoin price. So as the price changes on a centralized exchange, they need to change which transaction they would mine to claim to arbitrage, for example, a decentralized exchange, an AMM on chain, they need to do that arbitrage, but the price that they're going to do that arbitrage at has to change as the Bitcoin price changes. So they need to be constantly updating their block template, which is not something you can do in the public mempool. It's not something that you can do without very careful design. And in fact, it's not even something that all hardware supports, all ASICs support. So there's a lot of MEV and MEVil that would be generated by that instead. So I think a lot of these arguments kind of fall flat. However, that's not to say that MEVil is necessarily a given, that there people will build things which then will expose MEVil that then people will actually use. We don't know. The Rollups are obviously one of the biggest concerns, but will all of the rollups have some centralized sequencer that operates it, as is the case on, I believe, almost all of the rollups in Ethereum, certainly all of the major ones that anyone uses, where the centralized sequencer captures all the MEV and no MEV flows up to miners to become MEVil. Um, it's possible. Maybe that will be the way everything works. Maybe we won't manage to get the law changed, and no one will want to run a centralized sequencer because it puts you at risk of being a money services business. And as a result, people will switch to base sequencers, and then we'll have tons of MEVil. We don't know, right? Any of these things are possible. It's very hard to predict what the future looks like here. Um, so it's a risk, and it's something we need to be very cognizant of as Bitcoiners. We saw where Ethereum went. They tried to address the risk, but didn't come up with any great solutions. And as a result, censorship resistance in Ethereum got wrecked. And more importantly, while the censorship resistance in Ethereum is bad because of MEV and MEV complexity and MEVil, it would be even worse in Bitcoin. You can be a staker in a proof of stake system and make 10%, 50% less revenue than the next staker over. It sucks, but you can do it. You're not going to go out of business as a result. In a proof of work system, you go out of business. Your cost of electricity is somewhat comparable. Your actual operational costs are somewhat comparable to all other miners. Cost of electricity has a floor, right? Sometimes it's cheap, super cheap, unused electricity in some parts of the world, but you still have the same ASIC costs. You still have the same operational costs and operational overhead. If you make 10% less revenue than the next miner, you're going out of business. And so MEVil is, in fact, substantially worse in a proof of work system than a proof of stake system. It's substantially worse for the system and worse for censorship resistance in the system. And if we lose censorship resistance in Bitcoin in a kind of long-term, unfixable way, I don't really know what the point of Bitcoin is if we lose that. So all of that to say, we need to have a better answer than Ethereum does and than Ethereum did. And I think that needs more research. I think, Jay from Localhost Research and I put out a paper or write up of a technology we called MEVpool, which tries to be a slightly better response to the existence of MEVil than what Ethereum does today with their proposer builder separation tech. We think it's pretty good. We don't think it's great. It might be the best we can do, and if it is, we should build it. Someone should build it. I don't have time to build it, but someone should build it, and certainly we should probably could find money for them to do that. But also we need more research. We need more people thinking about this to say, is this actually the best we can do? Does this really solve the problem? And can we come up with something better? And as we do that research, I think we can hopefully de-risk the costs of MEVil in Bitcoin. There's fairly likely, with Tether coming to Taproot assets, with people presumably doing more stablecoin trading, even just the existence of stablecoins and the ability to swap them on chain will almost certainly create non-trivial amounts of MEVil just because people are going to be doing that with Zcash single transactions where miners can do arbitrage games. Uh, we'll see MEVil develop. I don't know that it's necessarily guaranteed, but it's certainly very likely. And so we need to be prepared in a useful way, I would say. And I think as we prepare, it's not necessarily the case that we need to let this dictate what we can do in terms of consensus rules.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that's something that a lot of people have misunderstood about my opinion. Maybe I haven't made it clear, but it's one thing to say we need to figure this out. This is a major risk, and maybe we should slow walk something like OpCat until we've at least invested some amount to research the risks of these things. It's something very different to say that we should not have new features to Bitcoin. We should not have the ability to do for people to hold their coins in whatever clever and inventive systems they come up with because of these risks, especially when these risks could happen on their own, right? These risks could develop because people might start using rootstock. Nothing needs to change in Bitcoin. People might start using rootstock. Suddenly there's a lot of ARB flow there, and there's a lot of MEVil. Could happen. I think it's likely, but it could happen. So my view is that like we should invest. Consensus changes are slow. There's no world in which we're gonna activate some consensus change super quickly in the next 6 months, for example. um, and so my view would be that it would be very nice if some of the advocates, especially some of the well-funded advocates for consensus changes in Bitcoin and for who are building technologies with or without consensus changes that might expose Bitcoin to MEVil risks, would also fund some research on MEVil responses, whether that's engaging with the MEVpool paper, extending it, analyzing it, or coming up with new ideas. It would be very nice, in my view, for some of the funding of things that create these risks to go towards that. And I think if it did, it doesn't need all that much. Hopefully we can come up with compelling answers without too much work. It doesn't need all that much funding. It doesn't need all that much work. And then after we get there, after we put in the work, we get some funding, we get some research, then we can move forward with consensus changes that do whatever we want. And I imagine that it wouldn't delay those consensus changes at all. If people started investing in a serious way today in that research, by the time consensus changes are have some kind of broad consensus, we'll have compelling answers, not necessarily answers we're excited about, but at least answers to what we want to do about MEVil risks in Bitcoin. And maybe we
Got it.
won't have necessarily spent the time to build them, but we have an answer. We're okay with this, not necessarily happy, but we're okay with this, and we're gonna start building it now as we deploy this soft fork and whatever. I don't think it would necessarily delay a soft fork. I think that's something a lot of people assume, and my frustration has been that like my desire for people to fund this research has been interpreted as we must only do consensus changes that are weirdly hobbled in order to try to reduce the MEVil risk of an individual change. And like, why don't we just invest in coming up with answers to MEVil rather than do weird hobbled consensus changes because we don't want to do the investment? Like, we could just invest in this. We could do that, and then we don't have
Yeah.
to have weird hobbled consensus changes. It's just a
I
weird
mean, as I'm
approach.
understanding it, there's different views on this anyway. That some people's view seems to be, MEV is inevitable. That you can't stop this thing, and then others are maybe their view is more like, oh, if we maybe the idea would be, oh, if we, I don't know, if I talk to like a Reardon code, his idea might be like, oh, what's the minimum effective dose? What's the minimum thing that we could get that gets us I don't know, LN hands or gets us,
Yeah.
LN symmetry or something like that. So I guess there's just different views on what
Yeah.
exactly this stuff
And
is, right?
I mean, I think if your view is that MEVil is uh going to happen and is totally inevitable, then like you should definitely be investing in in
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's
mitigating
kind of one end.
technologies.
Yeah.
If your view is that like, well, MEVil is this hairy, and I get it. I think a lot of people view MEVil risk as this like hairy, complicated subject, and it is. um, where maybe they're not necessarily experts in all of the things that happen in Ethereum. You kind of, in order to really do effective research there, you need to be more of an expert in Ethereum than Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of Bitcoiners who are like, wow, I don't feel uh, not capable, but like I don't feel like I have the experience required to do that kind of research. So I'm just going to try to sidestep it and say like, okay, well, maybe we can get these features in Bitcoin, and then they don't really enable any additional MEVil risk. And I guess I just get frustrated by that, and I get where people are coming from there. I can't really argue with it. I understand why that's people's view, um, but it does frustrate me because I think these things can these things can progress in parallel, right? Like we can have research going on what the actual soft forks we want is, not just like weird restricted things, but what do we actually want? What are we building towards? Not necessarily what we're building now, but like what are we building towards, and then we can work backwards to find what we should build now. Um, while at the same time, people can be doing research on the MEV track and the MEVil track. Um,
Yeah,
but
I guess one
yeah,
other view I might throw at you is I've heard this view that, oh, it's an app layer thing. The app layers should be attentive to MEV. They must mitigate the risks for their users. That's the other argument I've heard.
yeah,
So what's your
I,
reaction to
I
that?
I think that in part comes from the Ethereum MEV definition, which is different than MEVil. Um, the Ethereum MEV definition includes the cost to users. And so, when Ethereum people talk about MEV, it's one huge bucket. It's like the centralizing effect, the PBS, whatever. And then also it includes, well, they're doing arbitrage and the users are getting worse price execution on their DEX trades because of
Right.
this arbitrage. And so Ethereum, MEV is a thing that is in part needs to be addressed at the app layer because the app was designed in a way that gets users worse price execution, gives the users a worse product um, than they would otherwise get. And so I think that has bled over a little bit, and I think it's really a terminology thing. It's like MEVil is just the centralizing effects of it and not the cost to users. And you can say, well, the app should be built in a way where there's no MEV, there's no cost to users, and thus there's also no MEVil. And that's fair, but not all apps are going to be built that way. And the reality we have to contend with is that, and it's very, very, very hard to build apps that don't have MEV. It takes way more research, and it's not clear that it is
Right.
universally possible.
And it
Um,
might
you
not
know,
even be incentive. Like, it might not be, yeah, as you said, it might not be possible, or it might be the kind of thing where they are selfishly playing this game that impacts the rest of,
right,
everybody else,
right. And
right?
so
Like,
I
whether
don't,
it's, yeah.
yeah, so I don't buy that that's a solution, quote unquote, to the MEVil risk. Certainly, applications should consider it, but not all of them will. And even those that do, I don't know.
Yeah, I see.
There's still some
Another
risk.
kind of line of thinking, and I believe, I think I was watching a panel, and I think the argument was, okay, really the problem is things like private order flow, i.e., private, or in our context, it might be like private mempools, right? Like a Mara slipstream kind of thing, or this idea of if it's so technically difficult that only PhD specialists can do it, because then it's now not accessible to the, the everyday miner. Um, How are you seeing that?
I mean, it's certainly both. In Ethereum, we've seen, it started as it's complicated, and it's complicated enough that only one or two companies have the real talent and expertise to build a super competitive block template in every block. Um, and that developed into private order flow, right? Because now users are getting worse price fills. They're getting their arbitrage is worse. And as a result of that, because they're getting arbitrage, because the DEX is getting arbitrage, they're getting worse price fills against the DEX than they would have. And what the response has been is that users instead submit their transactions directly to the MEV extraction companies. And they have a handshake deal and they say, look, I'm going to send my transaction directly to you. You are going to get the right to do some arbitrage against it and get any fees associated with it, whatever. That goes exclusively to you. I'm not sending it to anyone else. But in exchange, you give me half that cost back or half the value back or something like that. You can arb against it, but give me half. And in exchange, I won't
And
send it
then
to
it
anybody
feels
else.
like a bit of like a mafia kind of, here's a deal you can't afford to say no to,
Right.
or whatever. Here's a deal you can't refuse.
So it's nuts. And because mining block building was already so centralized, it's just gotten even more centralized. You only give it to the top block builder because why would you go to the number two block builder? You just give it to the top one. Maybe you give it to both number one and number two, but even that's complexity you didn't need. Uh,
Yeah.
so
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 let's
yeah,
bring
I
it
mean
back to
it can
Bitcoin
get
then. Like,
really dangerous
yeah,
really quick.
yeah. Because like if we bring it back to Bitcoin, I guess now we're kind of maybe coming to more like the filters and the spam debate a little bit, because this kind of comes to the, I guess here's how here's how I'm understanding it. You tell me where I'm getting something wrong or whatever. But as I read a lot of the, most and now to be clear, Bitcoin Core is not a monolith. There's a lot of different views. But if I looked, as I tried to read some of the arguments back and forth, it seemed like most of the people either with Core today or previously with Core, their concern was really around mining centralization and this idea of private mempools, or what's known as direct to miner submission. Whereas, let's say the filter guys, their kind of view is like, oh, we should do everything we can to fight the spammers, and in their view, the filter view, I guess I could characterize that as saying Bitcoin Core is not doing enough. I'm doing quotes here. Bitcoin Core is not doing enough to fight the spam, right? That's probably
Yeah.
their view, or they're sort of saying it like, oh, see, Bitcoin Core, you're just bending over for the spammers,
Mm-hmm.
and we should fight them harder. Whereas the
Mm-hmm.
core, I'm kind of generalizing a little bit here, but most of them seem to be of this view that the risk being prevented here is if there's economic incentive to put this spam into the blocks, you try to relay filter it out, you're creating this risk that everybody goes to the Mara slipstreams of the world, and then we lose the public mempool. Is
Yep.
that fair, or how do you see it?
I think that's a big part of the debate. Yeah. I think I think you're totally right that like the view is that the view from many of the folks who want more filtering is that this thing has these use cases have tail risks to Bitcoin the currency, to Bitcoin the system. And they're right about that. There are certainly tail risks to these use cases of Bitcoin. And that they want to see Bitcoin Core fight it as much as they can. As much as they can, they want to see even if it's fairly marginal, they want to see it be a little more work to get these things included in a block. Um, and yeah, I think the risk of private mempools is a big part of the reason why folks don't don't share that view. That people will route around the public network, and the more you encourage people to route around the public network, the more people do crazy stuff with that. We already see several private mempool startups. There's two or three, at least two, maybe three startups doing MEV extraction on Bitcoin, like explicitly, like we're going to build a private mempool that relays only to the largest pools or only to pools we sign contracts with, and people are going to submit their transactions directly to us. And if you mine at one of the larger pools, you're going to make more money as a result. Um, Luckily, they don't have a huge transaction flow, but they exist. And in their view, these things are going to continue to develop. And I think that to the extent that we take actions which encourage people to utilize these technologies more and more, the worse it is for mining centralization. I over the last however many years, my view has been that there are two big challenges in Bitcoin that will determine whether Bitcoin is successful, in my view, but really, whether it's accomplishing the goal of being good money, and that's mining centralization and whether we can get people using non-custodial wallets because we can build good user experience around non-custodial wallets that provide good privacy. And if we can meaningfully address those two risks, then I think we've massively de-risked Bitcoin. Bitcoin is going to provide real material social value, societal value for a long time. But if we don't, there's real risks that we don't accomplish that, right? If people use only custodial wallets, well, everything ends at KYC'd and AML'd, and what was the point? You could just use dollars, right? If mining remains as centralized as it is, eventually our government's going to step in and say, you know what? We just want you to start censoring transactions. Those transactions for North Korean money, don't let them through. And of course, it starts that way. It ends up with those transactions from my political opponent, don't let them through. If we freeze North Korea's money, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world, but once you start down that slope, there's no coming back. Um, and all that to say, the way we have to fix mining centralization is we need to decentralize block template creation again. Whether
Right. So
that's
this is coming to
Stratum
like the
v2,
SV2 and the datum stuff.
Datum,
Yeah.
Braid Pool, P2 Pool v2, whatever it is, there's a lot of work going on in this space that I'm really excited about. If we can't drive adoption of those technologies over the next decade, I think there's real risk that Bitcoin fails to provide material societal value in the decade after that. And if and I think we're at a crossroads here where we're starting to see shoots of green, we're starting to see adoption. Uh, we're starting to see big players in the mining ecosystem say they care. Uh, Massive announcement in Vegas that everyone totally missed, totally flew under the radar. Bitmain. Bitmain and Pool announced that they were going to start enabling their miners to select their own templates. Huge.
Oh, as in like have SV2 support in the miner.
Unclear which protocol they were talking about, but they were talking
Okay.
about on the pool level for Antpool that Antpool was going to allow SV2 or some protocol like it for
Oh,
their
cool.
miners.
I didn't even catch
Massive
that. Okay,
announcement.
cool.
Literally no one
Yeah.
saw it. We need to, it's Bitmain, so
Yeah.
take it with a grain of salt. But like the fact that they even felt compelled to do it is huge. Um,
Yeah. And
the
I'm
the
sure you
fact that
saw this recent one. I'm sure it'd be good to mention this as well on the podcast so people know. But I think I think it was the SRR guys, they put out like a study showing that basically, I think they did a comparison study of like, I think it was, correct me if I'm right, I think it was Hash Labs did a comparison study of like a miner using SV1 versus SV2. And they found that the SV2, I think it earned something like 7% more, which is massive for a miner, right?
yeah. I mean they I made all kinds of assumptions going into that. I think the assumptions are perfectly reasonable, but they're going to vary substantially across different mining farms. But it's a great report. Miners should totally read it. Miners should totally consider it, and miners should get on the horn with their pool and say like, "Hey, why aren't you offering these features for me?" Um, but yeah, so we're starting to see real shoots of green here. We're starting to see a lot of promise that we're going to start to materially address the mining centralization issue in Bitcoin. But if we end up with MEVil or strong transaction selection centralization pressures in the short term, all that's going to die real quick, right? Because no miner is going to say, oh, I could run my own node and select the transactions that go in the block, and it's good for Bitcoin if I do that. And there's some relay advantages and some security advantages to doing that. So, maybe it increases my profitability a little bit, but oh, if I go mine at the pool, they have all this private transaction order flow, this private transaction relay, private mempool. They have complicated MEV extraction, and they're going to pay me 10% more because they can, because they're actually making that much more, no miner is going to switch. They're going to go to the large centralized pools that we have today, and we're going to be stuck. We're going to be locked into the level of mining centralization we have today, which I think is totally unacceptable. Again, if things don't change over the next decade, Bitcoin is going to be censored, and we're not going to be. There will be no Bitcoin the way we view it today in 15 years. Um, So we got to get this fixed, and it really concerns me when there are risks that might completely kill the progress we're starting to make. Um, we've put all this work in. I put some work in, but certainly the SRI folks and many others have put a lot of work in to move the needle here. And if we get cut off right now, it's going to be really frustrating because I don't
Right.
think we get a
Yeah.
real another shot at this.
The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold vault. The Bold Vault is a 2 or 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bold holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Cold Card hardware wallets to spin up a Bold Vault in just a few minutes, and the Bold Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bold today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbold.io. And now, back to the show. Interesting. Yeah. More, I guess, on the whole mempool and blocks aspect of things, I'm curious to get your view as well. It seems to be this broad direction that we're kind of going in, and I want to get your thoughts on this kind of parallel with the way full RBF went down, right? Like full RBF, it just sort of, I mean, my understanding of it, you correct me if I'm getting anything wrong, but it's sort of like for years and years, there were big haters, right? Like Roger Ver and all the B cashers, they hated RBF, right? And eventually it sort of became this behavior of like, look, most Bitcoiners understand that if it's not confirmed, you don't have anything. And so eventually it sort of came to this level of, well, should RBF be the default? And sort of in the, I think it's like 2022, 23 era, there was only maybe 2 or 3 sort of main opponents of that. At that time, it was kind of like Sergey from Bitrefill and maybe John Carvalho were kind of the main opponents of that. But eventually, because this is a relay policy, it just became sort of the de facto, the network just kind of operated this way. Are we going to see a similar thing with kind of some of this filters and spam stuff? Do you think it's going to eventually go that way,
We'll
with things like
see.
op return limits and other things?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think the story of full IBF was basically that RBF has a lot of value for wallets. It can make for a much better user experience. As a result, it was ultimately enabled, but only optional. So transactors could opt in or out of it to give people the option to say, look, if you strongly hate RBF, great. If you strongly love RBF, also great. Um, then some wallets, for whatever reason, were creating transaction flows that fairly rarely, but they did exist where transactions were being RBF'd that were not opting into RBF originally. And so Bitcoin Core was rejecting them. Uh, and it turned out, so Bitcoin Core added the option for it. You could do full RBF. There were a few transactions that used it, but there were enough, and miners always turned it on. And so it turned out when people went to look, a number of months after the option was added, that something like 80 or 90% of hash rate had turned it on. And it doesn't make sense for Bitcoin Core's relay policy to do one thing and then have 80 or 90% of hash rate do something different. You get into all these things that we're talking about. You get into this question of are is a small miner who doesn't run a big node, who doesn't have a lot of peers, gonna get worse transaction flow, gonna make less money. Um, and So Bitcoin Core just said like, no, well, clearly we need to match the relay policy to what's actually happening. We can't have defaults that don't make sense, um, that encourage bad behavior, that cause additional bandwidth usage, has all kinds of problems. And so they flipped the default and just said like this needs to be true. Um, and I think the op return debate is a little different in the sense that it's a little more it's a much more rare thing. RBF is a really material change to the user experience of wallets. The
Fair point.
ability to
Yeah.
increase the transaction fee on your transactions is a big deal versus larger op returns. Like, no one really uses op returns. They're used here and there by various meta protocols. But they're very expensive to do by comparison to like inscriptions. You're not going to put big data, large amounts of data in an op return because it's just expensive. I mean, people do it now for the lulz just because there's been big drama about it. But if there were no drama about it, no one would do it. Um, and here, yeah, I mean, it was done more anticipatory. I think another way to look at relay policy, which somewhat aligns with some of the filter people's view, folks who are pro additional filters, is that relay policy is a nudge, right? That historically, and it's not used as much that way anymore, but historically is a way to nudge people to do transaction types that were considered better for the network. There were a bunch of other reasons to do relay policy, but ultimately, relay policy nudges people away from using stuff in transactions that we want to reserve for future soft forks. There's no reason for you to use it. You could use it, but it doesn't do anything. And so we want to discourage you from using that and encourage so that we can use it in later soft forks more easily. It's not a huge deal, but it's a nudge, and no one really has a strong reason to do it, so we're nudging them in the right direction, and no one's gonna do it. It's great. It works great. Um, it's a weak nudge. If there's economically, really strong economic reason to do something, then the nudging someone is not gonna work. And in this case, someone was Citria specifically, but with all of the meta protocol work going on, you can imagine that someone else will do it in the future as well. Someone wanted to they needed to embed data in the outputs of transactions because of the way their contracts worked, because of the way their specific BitVM setup worked. It had to be in the outputs. It couldn't be in witness data. It had to be in the actual transaction. And so they were like, well, we need to put a bunch of data there. We're going to do some really terrible scheme,
The fake pub
putting it
keys, kind of
fake pub
spamming the UTXO
keys,
set thing.
whatever it
Yeah.
is, really hurting the UTXO set. And so another way to look at increasing the op return limit is to nudge people away from doing that, right? To nudge people and say, look, no, here we're going to provide you a better way to do this. You're going to do it anyway, so we're going to provide you a better way to do it so that it is better for the overall Bitcoin system, and the Bitcoin system is healthier as a result. I think that nudging view is great. It is a great way to address policy. And I totally forgot how I ended up on this subject, and I was going to tie it back
Yeah.
to what we were
Right.
talking
Well, I
about
mean, I
before.
was
I
asking, like,
forgot.
do you see parallels between kind of how full RBF went down and how,
Oh yeah.
this whole op
I
return and spam sort of
Yeah, I think
consideration?
RBF is just a little different because it's such a huge difference in wallet user experience and in the set of things you can do on Bitcoin versus op returns. Like, it's only really useful for this really weird niche BitVM setup that Citria was talking about doing. And there's probably some related setups that might need it, but hopefully we do like TX hash or something and then they don't need it anymore. But
Right. Right. So, yeah, and as I understand, like, that op return specific PR is kind of relatively nothing burger in terms of how many people are actually going to do that. But it kind of reignited the whole spam kind of debate. And
Mhm.
and people were sort of, I guess, relitigating or kind of bringing that up again. While I've got you, I'm curious to get your view on this because Luke Dasher and kind of the Knots and the Filter guys, they sort of keep talking about this 2023 PR, which was, the data carrier size one. I'm pretty sure you're probably familiar with it. As I'm curious to get your view on that. Like, is your view that even if that were merged, the spammers would still be spamming anyway? Like they would just use, alternate relay networks? Or do you think, like, because I guess one view, as I'm trying to understand it, is, hey, the horse had already bolted, right? Like all these people were already spamming the chain, and, changing the latest version of core would not have realistically done much. Right now, to be fair, maybe the filter guys would say no, but it's about sending a social signal, and we want to stop kind of VCs funding these spamming startups. Therefore, if core had made this change in 2023, maybe the UTXO set would not have blown out so much. Where do you sit on this? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the op returns don't end up in the UTXO set, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, you know, the op return was standardized as a scheme to include some amount of data in a similar situation, right? Someone said, "Look, I'm doing this thing. I'm doing it, whether you want me to or not. I've already written the code. I'm going to use it. It's going to embed the data in fake pub keys or whatever, in a really hostile way." And the response was, "Well, no, we're going to try to encourage you to do something better. We're going to nudge you in the other direction, by making it easier for you to embed data in a way that does less damage to Bitcoin." And on one hand, I agree. It'd be nice if people didn't spam the chain, if we had a way to prevent that, uh, and miners still got paid. Uh, we still made sure miners got paid at the end of the day. If we had a way to prevent that, we would do it. And I think, to your earlier description, I think that's really a big part of the discussion here and the disagreement is this philosophical underpinning of like, should Bitcoin Core do the thing that's going to result in the best outcome for the Bitcoin, that's going to result in terms of the best, technological outcome for the Bitcoin network. It's going to, encourage people to do things that do less damage to Bitcoin, but they're going to do things that maybe are bad for Bitcoin. Whether they are or not depends on your view, whether you like data on chain or not. Um, or do should Bitcoin Core just fight it as much as they can to make a statement, to discourage it, to, it might still happen, but discourage it where at all possible. And I guess I don't view it as Bitcoin Core's job to decide what they're not. So, I mean, to be clear, Bitcoin Core is not able to decide what goes in the network, and I think that's part of the view of most of the engineers working on Bitcoin. It's very much an engineering mindset, right? To say like, well, look, here's the set of things we can do, and so we should pick the most optimal thing out of the set of things we can do. We can't stop people from doing the spam, so we're going to make sure that it is the least costly for the network that we're, helping to maintain as possible.
Yeah, gotcha. Sorry, one thing. I just want to make
Making
sure
like
we're kind of getting the
statements.
right. Yeah, sorry. Just one thing. I want to, I guess, clarify the question a little bit, because one thing, and to be fair to Antoine Ponceau, he was trying to say, look, people are kind of conflating these different debates around op return versus kind of the broader spam wars, let's say, because as an example, that data carrier size PR from like 2023, I think that related more to trying to, in Luke's view, closing the taproot inscription envelope bug, whereas the op return thing is, op returns. So I guess in the filter camp view, and I'm not from the filter camp myself, so I'm trying to understand their view, but I think their view is more like, if you had the latest version of Bitcoin Core at that time had tried to, let's say, close the bug of taproot inscription envelope, that even though the spammers could have, found a new way to do a taproot inscription, that it would have discouraged this kind of behavior, and therefore the UTXO set would not have blown out from 4 gigs to 12 gigs or whatever, like 80 million UTXOs to like, I don't know, 200 million UTXOs at the peak, something like that. So just
Yeah.
to, I guess, separate the op return part from the broader kind of spam and
Right.
BRC20 aspect.
I mean, I think there is obviously some level of truth to the concept that if it's harder, it is somewhat less likely for something to happen because it's harder. Um, but at the same time, there's a classic fallacy here is the no smart cow or one smart cow fallacy. Um, it's often used in the context of private piracy, digital media piracy, um, where the claim is that well there exists no smart cow. There is no one who can figure out how to break the DRM, and thus it's illegal to break the DRM. But the problem is there usually is one smart cow. There's one guy who can
Gotcha.
figure out how to break your DRM on your media, and all they have to do is tell people how to do it, and now everyone can do it because they just write some open source code, and now everyone can do it. And now all the cows leave
Gotcha.
the yard because one cow figured out how to open the gate. Um, and I think the same applies here, where you're really assuming that here's this thing that has value, economic value for someone. Maybe I don't particularly value NFTs, but other people do. Clearly, other people are willing to pay for them. And you're saying that no one is going to build it on Bitcoin because it's a little harder. And I'll tell you, I know Casey Rodomar, who made the
The
inscriptions
ordinals and
and
inscriptions and
ordinals
runes. Yeah.
designs. The guy's a smart fucking cookie. Like, I, whether it was easy or not, he would have figured it out, assuming he wanted to. And so you really now have to argue that, like, okay, well, Casey wouldn't have wanted to build it if it wasn't easy to just embed the stuff in and witness data, but like I don't buy it. I mean, okay, maybe you could have limited the total size of it, but people have legitimate use for fairly large witnesses. Whether it's a large multi-sig or whatever, it is not weird to have a fairly large witness. And so, okay, we could have limited it to not 100K, but I don't know, 50K or something. But that's still, I mean, you still get an image in there, you still get an NFT in there. Um, or you start banning people who want to do large multisigs. Like, all right, you ban Liquid, you can't do that. Um, and so I think still here, just in practice, you can't stop these things. NFTs on Bitcoin, there's people who want them. Um, and there was certainly an economic argument made by a number of uh, NFT people that Bitcoin NFTs on Bitcoin are somehow more valuable because they're on Bitcoin and Bitcoin's great and we all think Bitcoin's great and okay. And so yeah, in practice, I don't really buy it because there always exists one smart cow somewhere who's going to figure it out. And even and again, I think within the set of things that is really truly possible, as long as we want to allow, for example, Liquid's fairly large multisig, um, you can't prevent people from embedding a fairly large amount of data. I mean, it's not a whole 4 megabyte transactions or whatever, but certainly enough to get a monkey JPEG or a uh, Pepe JPEG or whatever into a transaction. It just doesn't need very many bytes to fit Pepe, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, and I think this is one of those things where I think I've seen a lot of people in the community get really kind of upset about this issue because they see it like it's in their mind, maybe it's like a dereliction of the duty of Bitcoin core developers that they should have done more to fight the spam in their view. I see it a bit more. I'm probably a little more in your camp on this. Like, I think I don't think we could. I don't think there's much that could have been done to stop it. Again, I don't count myself as like a guru or a technical protocol expert. I'm just trying to read the different arguments back and forth, and I think most of the core developers, I think they had the better argument here. But
I think it's just a philosophical difference. I mean, it's not something where you can really apply logic and say like, well, this is clearly better. It's just, one group wanted a statement basically, and one group wanted to was more of the engineering mindset that there's just like there's some set of possible things, and here's the best outcome for Bitcoin, and it's maybe not this, it's not a statement, it's maybe the inverse of a statement that people wanted. Um, so I can't say that,
yeah,
one is like strictly right and one is strictly wrong. It's a philosophical difference, and I'm an engineer. I think uh, do taking action which would result in bloating the UTXO set more, or even worse, I think like okay, well, if they bloat the UTXO set a little more, it's not the end of the world, but it's not good. And certainly, it's my view that it's not Bitcoin Core's job to make statements like that as a project. Certainly, many Bitcoin Core contributors did themselves say, not a fan of this stuff. People shouldn't do this stuff, but I also can't stop them. So, I mean, there's your statement, I guess.
yeah, yeah. And do you have any thoughts on whether core? So we've seen a lot more not adoption, I guess, recently. I think the number of people are throwing around nowadays, at least as we speak, is around 11%. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, will core remain the dominant implementation? Is it just a small minority, but a loud minority, or do you actually believe that it's going to keep going up if people are upset that core didn't make the statement that we were talking about?
Yeah. I mean, as we learned many, many, many times repeatedly throughout the block size wars, uh, people running nodes doesn't do anything all that much. It's good that we have more nodes, to be clear. That's good. But they don't accomplish anything unless the node in question is really, protecting someone's money. It is being used to transact, to evaluate what the blockchain is.
Right. It's a question of is it an economic node or not?
Yeah, and is it a material economic node? If it's your personal wallet where you do one transaction every now and again, it's not really a huge deal. Um, and I think for the vast majority of these, they're people who maybe have Bitcoin, maybe you have Bitcoin on their phone, are big Bitcoiners, but they weren't necessarily using the Bitcoin Core wallet to begin with, and spinning up a new node or switching their node that didn't have any money in it to begin with isn't accomplishing anything, doesn't change anything. And I don't think the Knots is a one person project. It is one guy who decides whether to merge various patches. And if you're a serious custodian, or if you are, seriously holding a lot of money, transacting a lot of money through a node, you're not gonna use that. It's just not an option. Now, maybe Knots will be able to grow its developer team or something, but I frankly, I don't think it's super likely. That the reality is smart people want to work with lots of other smart people, and there are a lot of smart people working on Bitcoin Core. And so a new developer coming in and saying, I want to work on full node software. Yeah, there's some who want to work on Knots, but the vast majority of smart people want to go to the place that has most of the smart people already at it. And Knots is a one-man project, so that it's not that.
Gotcha. Okay. So I guess one other area to chat about, like L2s more broadly. Like now we've kind of touched on a few things like Lightning and Arc and these ZK rollups. I'm curious if you have a thought around. I think some of this debate or some of this kind of recent arguments, I think people have been, let's say, they see this as like, oh, you're opening the door for these ZK rollups. And I guess depending on the view, some people see that as spam, right? They see that as like, that's spam, even though, I don't know, you could argue either way, because is that monetary related, right? Like maybe we've got to distinguish between, okay, JPEGs, I think that's spam, BRC20, yeah, that's spam. But if something's attempting to do monetary scaling, is that spam? And then maybe the
Yeah, I mean,
question: if some
some people
people
were
are
now
challenging,
arguing
like how
Lightning is
much
spam.
scaling is it going to be? Go on.
Some people were now arguing Lightning is spam. I mean, it's just the line gets real fuzzy and gets kind of absurd sometimes.
Yeah. So I guess just comparing different L2s, like obviously you're working on Lightning, so obviously you're bullish on Lightning, but things like Arc, state chains, ZKP, how are you sort of like, do you see this as like Lightning is the one that's going to be the most, like, going to do the most volume? Or do you think maybe ZKPs have a lot of potential? Like, how are you seeing
Yeah.
other L2s?
Um, so yeah, I think we to categorize L2s, we have to first split them into trusted and non-trusted. So ones that are
Right.
either custodial or, really heavily trusting some system. So on the custodial end, there's
Like
obviously
Liquid.
Liquid,
Yeah.
eCash, Federated and Cashew. There's also Spark. It's not custodial. A state chain, there's no custodian who has a key who can take your money, but it's fully trusted. If they switch their software and start running some software that does something different from what they claim they're doing, they can, with some effort, take all of your money. So it's still fully trusted, right? And it can be federated, it can be, multi-sig, but it's fully trusted. On the untrusted end, on the non-custodial end, there's some threshold of how much money do you need for it to be non-custodial? How much money do you need to have a wallet here that's really truly non-custodial? And there it's a question of, how much money does it cost to go on chain and claim your money on chain, like punish your counterparty in Lightning, force close. There's an equivalent logic, whether it's a roll up or ARC or what have you. Um, Plus the cost of onboarding. So what's it cost to actually create a new wallet? And I view all of the non-custodial um, technology, scaling technologies as ways through that lens. So what's the onboarding cost and what's the force closure cost? What's the unilateral exit cost? Today, I think Lightning is still one of the most compelling options. Certainly, it's the most compelling just practically. Um, all of the BitVM based rollups have a lot of complexity, but also have an N of N trust model or one of N trust model. You have N parties, and you have to trust that at least one is online and honest. Um, it's not completely trustless, but it's pretty good. You can't do unilateral exit, so it's has some risks, but it is good. It's pretty great idea. But importantly, what a lot of these things end up being is multiplicative scaling on top of Lightning. So if we want to build the best scalability thing we can, probably that's going to be something with Lightning on top. So a lot of the Arc designs now are talking about putting payment channels on top of Arc because Arc gives you these VTXOs. They can kind of operate like a UTXO, and you can put a payment channel on top. And you can say, okay, well, actually, if I have a payment channel on top, it addresses a lot of the issues that Arc has, substantial liquidity cost, slow transactions if you try to remove some of the liquidity cost. Um, and so Lightning on top or payment channels on top fix a lot of problems. If you have a rollup, well, rollups are great, but you're still putting some amount of data per transaction in every block. You don't want to do that, right? You want to have and Lightning scales in the other direction, right? So it's almost like a rollup scale in
Right.
one
People have said
direction,
Lightning scales payments, not users.
right?
Right.
Rollup scale users, right? It scales reduces the onboarding cost and the unilateral exit cost to the rollup, not necessarily out of the rollup, but at least scales users. And then Lightning scales the payments, right? So you can say, well, now we can do infinite number of payments without hitting this rollup or hitting the chain. So at the end of the day, I think in the limit, we're going to end up with some combination of these technologies to build really good non-custodial scaling. But at the same time, fees are one set per fee pay. And so Lightning, once we've addressed a lot of the more immediate engineering challenges, I think the user experience of a Lightning wallet is really compelling. And especially when we're talking about a graduated wallet, because okay, you have this trusted segment over here, you have this untrusted segment over here. If fees are super high right now or whatever, we can increase the threshold where we move to the non-custodial segment. So we can say, okay, well, actually, you're only going to be non-custodial when you have 100,000 sats or 150,000, 200,000 sats, because fees are a little high right now. And then the fees come down, and then we can reduce the threshold, right? We can adjust that threshold dynamically based on what current fee rates are, what user experience you want to have, how much fee are you willing to tolerate as a percentage of your balance. And then as these other technologies mature, as we can start talking about doing timeout trees or payment channels on Arc or rollups or whatever, then we can put Lightning on top, and then we can reduce that balance, that threshold even further, right? So the user experience, I think, with a graduated wallet, we can have that really great user experience today. And then as these other scaling technologies come out, we can improve the trust model of it. So we can reduce the balance threshold at which you become non-custodial, but it won't change the user experience materially because we'll already have, super slick wallet that you just pay and receive money and all the transactions are instant and you don't really ask any questions. Um, and the only difference is now it's a little more non-custodial.
Yeah, interesting. So in a way, it's like these L2s aren't in as much of a direct competition. You're sort of seeing it more like it's kind of a collaborative thing in a way that Lightning, the way, let's say, Roy from Breeze talks about it, Lightning is like it's the, what's the word? It's like the common language between these different layers, and they're just gonna interact in different ways. And like you said, I think it's the Arc Labs guys who were talking about this like VTXO, this virtual chain concept, and they've mentioned like this idea of Spillman channels. So I guess that's what you were getting at with this idea of like having Lightning channels in an Arc VTXO, let's say, as opposed to on Bitcoin's chain per se directly. Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, I mean, look, I've kept you for some time, so I guess we should wrap up. Any closing thoughts? And of course, where can people find the campaign on Save Your Wallets, or Save Our Wallets, rather?
Yeah, no, just if you're an American, definitely go to saveourwallets.org. It's on the hat. You can pause now and pull up the website. If you're not, send it to your American friends. Tell them to get off their ass and call their congressperson. Because again, it's important. We talked about all these really great, how wallets are going to be really great over the next year or two, and how they're going to be super slick. But we can't build any of that if we don't have regulatory protection for developers and for people operating ancillary services for non-custodial wallets. So definitely make that call, make your voice heard, and tell your American friends to make their voice heard, whatever it takes.
Excellent. Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, and I want to encourage any listeners in America, please do take this on board. Obviously, we're bullish on Bitcoin, but we want to make sure our builders and developers can not go to jail for it and actually keep on building. So links will be in the show notes. It's saveourwallets.org. So Matt, thank you again for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.